So we've got two more talks in the next hour, and the first one is by Elodie Rafalimanana from Adobe, and she's going to talk about a subject which is very dear to my heart, on code reviews.
Thank you. So, hi everyone, my name is Elodie. I'm a software engineer at Adobe, and I'm here today to share about how to do efficient code reviews. So I have 8 years of experience in software development, and I've done code reviews in many different settings. And it's a subject that I really studied to find principles that make them efficient. So today I'm here to share with you the most important of my findings, which is it's not kindness, it's diplomacy that makes code reviews efficient. And I will explain how and why during the talk, and you will see how this connects back to containerizing applications. So to do this, first, I expose the problem that diplomacy solves. Then I explain what diplomacy is. And after this, we will see how to apply diplomacy in the code review as the reviewer. And by the end of this talk, I really hope that you would get away with effective techniques to share your technical feedback and apply your technical ideas. So let's start with the problem. This is the problem. This is developers arguing about code during a code review. Words like, it doesn't make sense, it's a horrible idea, it's just cosmetics, or you're doing it wrong, are all words that fly around and that contaminate tech. And this is the worst case of the code review. It just causes inertia and animosity, which all in all is really super inefficient, because the code is not merged, and worse, good code is not merged because developers can't work with each other. But actually, what are they arguing about? In fact, they're arguing about this. They are like painters in front of the canvas, and they are reviewing this pull request. They are discussing the changes to apply to this code to reach this end result right here, which is the merge code. So in this context, you understand that there is code before the review and there is code after the review. So as a developer, how do you share your feedback efficiently to other developers to apply needed changes to the code and merge good code without them hating you for the rest of their lives? So my point in this talk is to explain that to do this, you need to use diplomacy. So what is diplomacy? Diplomacy is a word that we don't hear so much often, right? In general, we hear it in a political context, and it stands for the conduct of international relations, which doesn't have much to do with coding. But actually, I discovered during an exhibition in Paris called The Art of Peace that was dedicated to diplomacy, that diplomacy is so much more than what we think. So there I discovered how diplomacy works in its details, and I will explain in very technical terms what it is and how we can use it in tech so that we all know what diplomacy is. So during this exhibition, I had 3 epiphanies that led me to this realization that we can use diplomacy in tech. First, diplomacy is a technique, and more specifically, diplomacy is a social framework. It means that it will handle your social interactions with other people. And second, diplomacy has an algorithm that we will see in a second. And finally, as a technique, diplomacy can be implemented. Cool, so let's deep dive. This is diplomacy's definition. So it's a social framework that you use to achieve your goal without making yourself enemies. Now, how does it achieve that? Diplomacy's algorithm is really super simple. It always chooses what brings you closer to your goal without hurting other people. And this part is very important. This is what makes it diplomacy and not manipulation, for example. Now, as a framework, how do you set up diplomacy? Diplomacy is set up with 2 things that you need to know. First, it is goal-driven. It means that from the get-go, diplomacy is set up with a goal. So diplomacy without a goal doesn't work. Second thing, diplomacy is actionable. Means it has a method that returns to you an action to do given a certain situation. So diplomacy will keep you very active. Now, how does it work and how does it implement this? Diplomacy works with two rules, very, very important rules that you need to know. First, understand first. Most people don't know that people do things because they think it's the right thing to do in their mind. So before telling that people are wrong, try to understand first what's the story in their mind, and then you can suggest an appropriate solution. So understand first the story in their mind. The second rule is every action contributes to the end goal. It means diplomacy has a function that returns the closest action that contributes to your goal. So keep in mind that diplomacy is very active and it's always helping you going towards a goal and building something. So when you call those two functions, you call first, understand first, and then only you get the closest action that contributes to your goal. So let's come back to this situation now that we understand this. In the situation when someone tells you your code doesn't make sense, the current solution in tech is to tell us developers to be kind. The problem with this advice is that it doesn't tell us what to do in a work environment where we are chasing goals and deadlines. But with what we have understood, diplomacy tells us what to do. So let's come back to this. When you use diplomacy, you wouldn't say the F word, because that's hurtful and it doesn't make you move forward. You wouldn't say either something very kind, but it doesn't make you move forward either. So in fact, you just explain what you did and you say, I did this to handle new value. And you stop there. You move forward, you explain what you did, and it's done. This is the action that diplomacy returns. So this is why I advocate that we switch from be kind, which is still very important, but not useful in a work environment, to use diplomacy instead, because diplomacy is what works. So let's apply this now to the code review. And we'll do this with the reviewer and the reviewee, and we'll be the reviewer. So let's set up the goal. The goal in the code review is to merge good code, both for the reviewee and the reviewer, but without making yourself enemies. As a reviewer, you will have to do two things: ask for change or ask for an explanation. But we'll focus on ask for change, and we'll seek to do it with diplomacy. Now you need to understand that diplomacy in real life, it uses the human API, which renders with attitude and words. For the attitude, as a reviewer, you have to be aware that from the get-go, you depart from this situation, where the reviewee submitted something that he considers finished. Also, at the same time, he is very, very impatient to merge the pull request. So be aware of those two things, and be aware that from the get-go, you depart from a situation of resistance between reviewee and reviewer. So imagine a big package that the reviewee is not willing to move, open, or change. So as a reviewer, you have to be someone who will be able to cancel that resistance with some kind of lifting device. For example, a balloon. So for the attitude, this will help you. First thing, for the attitude, you need to respect the work done by the reviewee. It means that never imply that they did not finish the work, because for them it's finished. That's why they submitted it. Then position yourself as someone who will help the reviewee merge the code, so you are on the same team. Now for the words. I have come up with 3 tips for you that will be useful when you are reviewing a pull request. The first tip is lift the code. Second tip, keep it lifted. And the third tip, keep it moving. It uses, again, the human API. So human API tells you 2 things. People don't like to be told what to do. And especially in the tech field, this is how we are wired. So be aware of this. Second, people don't like feeling undermined, which everyone can understand. Now, when we get to this tip right here, lift the code, this one is about when you see a change to apply in the code, Make it and express it like something to improve, but not something bad that the reviewee has done. So let's see how we implement this with words. This will be useful for design changes like refactor or implementation. My advice is to use positive comparatives. So in your next code review, try to do this, it works. Use more and add an adjective that qualifies good code. So as a reviewer, you are a good reviewer, so you know what makes good code, you know your stuff. So use adjectives like readable, maintainable, performant, or robust. This will give a good reason for the reviewee to apply the changes. Second, use open suggestions and leave the choice for the reviewee to apply or not your change. This will cancel the resistance in the way that the reviewee won't feel imposed a solution, but they can decide if your change is good or not. So I suggest for you to use I suggest to, what do you think of, is it possible to, or this could be like. You will see it makes a difference. So in a refactor, for example, it's better to say, can this be factorized? This can be removed. It would be more readable named as, instead of criticisms that are passive-aggressive and not useful, like too much duplicated code, and then adding the smiley. Don't do this. Also, something very mean, like useless. I don't know what to do when I see this. Or I don't understand your naming. Same for implementation. Implementation, you can say, could you try this pattern? Or this can be a service. Or I suggest to replace by a function. Much more effective than just an order, use this pattern, or something sounding personal, your code is too specific, or another useless comment, this block is too big. So we said the same information, but we said it differently, and it makes a difference in a human system. So you don't point what's bad, you say how to improve it. Now, let's say you have request changes, that it's not suggestions, it's things that you really want to apply to the code. So what you say is, use the passive voice. You can say should be, needs to be, must be, has to be, or something very effective, you use we. You put yourself in the same boat as the reviewee, and you just use we like something to cancel the resistance again. And something also very effective is to still use the old-fashioned way, use the polite form, and just ask what you want. So could you please? So for the request changes, you can say this could be checked, we could check this, or could you please check this? Instead of very authoritative, you should check this, you have to check this, or check this. So again, you need to ask for change clearly. Don't beat around the bush, just say what you want, but you remain very neutral. Now for keep it lifted, this is about being careful about what you say, because once you have the reviewee accept do the changes, you need them to add you again in the reviews, because you need still their cooperation. So for this, I have identified the 7 don'ts of the code review. And imagine this, that you are stabbing that balloon if you do one of those, and you can really consider that your changes are never going to be applied if you do one of those. So first don't assume. Don't say stuff like, this is wrong. But like we said, understand first. You can say, can you explain why you need this? Is this intended? Is there a reason for it? Or even say, I might be missing something. Can you help me understand? Second don't is, don't judge. Make it about the code and not the reviewee. So don't say stuff like, your code is bad, or I don't like accessing the DOM properties, because those are not useful. Just say what needs to be changed. So this needs to be changed like this. Or can the component handle it so that the reviewee thinks about it? To help you with this, you can use the judgment matrix. So consider those 2 columns. If your words fall into those 2 columns, good or bad, right or wrong, or the other words, then don't use them, because you will make the reviewee feel like you are evaluating them. And the review is not here to evaluate, it's here to merge good code. So the reviewee doesn't care at all if it's good or bad. They only care if they can merge or not. Remember this in a code review. The third point is don't point. Don't use you and say you checked the wrong value, but use the passive form. It's this value that should be checked. Keep it neutral, don't accuse, and use we. Fourth is don't give orders. So this advice I give here is for reviews between code owners. So reviewers, it's not because you're the reviewer that you're the boss of the reviewee. So we can use this library instead of use this library. Fifth, don't do their job. So be aware that people don't like being told what to do. So don't send them code snippets if they are not okay with it, because this would make them feel like they don't know how to do and you just give them the code snippets. Don't do this. Fifth, don't be aggressive. This is common sense, but I still need to say it. Don't be aggressive and use all caps and say, change this. Or worse, exclamation points, change this. Or even worse, emojis, change this. So no caps, no exclamation points, no offensive emojis. Finally, don't humiliate. It's normal in a code review to find bugs, but when you report the bugs to the reviewee, please don't print the stack trace in GitHub. Go to them, talk to them personally in person or in Slack, and just reference later that there is something to fix. So these are the 7 don'ts of the code review that I have identified. So this is very helpful. And so the third tip is to keep it moving. So this is about motivating the reviewee. This is about negotiating skills. So you have to realize that the code review is like a negotiation. So when you negotiate, I have 3 tips for you. Number 1, action-driven feedback. Make sure that your feedback contains an action to do. Second, argument-driven feedback. It contains a reason to change the code. And finally, persistence. Persist politely, because the reviewee will come up with all kinds of reasons to not do the changes, like it's overkill or it will be refactored later. But you need to be aware of this and prepare yourself to counter this back. So it is better, instead of saying something very vague, like it seems not optimized, it's better to say it can be optimized by using map entry. This is very straightforward. He knows what to change. It's better to say it should be renamed because it's more readable instead of it should be renamed. So that concludes what I wanted to say about the social techniques. And I saw that, in fact, those social techniques, we could apply them to some kind of automated system. And before we comment on a code review, for example, we could have format ourselves when we comment on the code review. And this would be what the code review comment linter would be like. So a comment would be always formatted this way. It would always contain a human resistance canceller with the passive voice and the we. It would always contain an action, which is the to-do for the reviewee. And it will always contain the positive comparative to flag your comment like something to improve for the reviewee. And finally, it would contain the argument, which is the good reason to change the code. So we could use this, and then it would be just remixed with all kinds of things that we do in a code review. But try this format, and you will see that it really works in the code reviews. I've seen the difference between formatting it this way, in a neutral way, and saying what needs to be changed and why, and it really works. So try this, and I think it will work. So this concludes diplomacy applied to the code review, but I want to finish the talk on a final note. So after my talk, I think the world will not change. It will remain a big, giant monolith, made of monolith people crashing each other simultaneously. But if you, the person who listened to my talk, with what I explained and what you are learning at DockerCon, you are able to upgrade yourself to a microservice architecture running diplomacy in the front and your core services at the back, letting you do what you have to do in this world without hurting other people, then I would have done something very useful today. Thank you very much.